Remnant. Battlefield. Outside Atlas. Present day. The sky burned with colors that had no names. Salem's magic, manifesting as reality itself, protested her presence. Ancient power that predated the kingdom's twisting atmosphere into auroras of crimson and black that made veteran huntsmen question whether they were witnessing warfare or apocalypse. Ruby Rose moved through the chaos with speed that left rose petals scattering in her wake, her silver eyes tracking threats with precision that came from 2 years of training at Beacon Academy and countless battles against Grimm that would have killed lesser huntresses. Crescent Rose, her beloved scythe rifle hybrid, spun through the air with mechanical grace, cutting down Beowulfs and Ursai with strikes that had been perfected through repetition until muscle memory transcended conscious thought. But the Grimm weren't the real threat today. "Cinder!" Ruby's voice cut through the battlefield cacophony, her tone carrying urgency that made her teammates immediately adjust their positions to provide support fire. The Fall Maiden turned with smile that had haunted Ruby's nightmares since Beacon's fall, flames dancing around her fingers with casual malevolence that suggested she was barely trying. Cinderfall had stolen half of the Fall Maiden's power, murdered Pyrrha Nikos, and orchestrated disasters that killed thousands, all in service of Salem's incomprehensible agenda. And she looked bored. "Little Red," Cinder observed with condescension that made Ruby's grip tighten on Crescent Rose's shaft. "Still charging headlong into situations you don't understand. Haven't you learned yet? Heroes die, especially the young, optimistic ones." Ruby fired, not with her scythe's blade, but with a high-caliber rifle mechanism on armor-piercing rounds that would have shredded conventional aura in seconds. Cinder deflected them with wall of flame that vaporized the bullets mid-flight, heat washing over Ruby with intensity that made her skin prickle despite aura protection. "Yang!" Ruby called, trusting her sister was already moving. Yang Xiaolong hit Cinder from the blind side with explosive force that came from her semblance. Burn, which converted damage received into strength, returned with interest. Her gauntlet's ember celica discharged with concussive blasts that made the air itself compress, each punch carrying kinetic energy sufficient to crack stone. Cinder staggered but adapted quickly, her flames intensifying as she engaged Yang in close combat that would have killed normal combatants through sheer thermal radiation. "Weiss, Blake, flank!" Ruby commanded, her tactical mind processing battlefield geometry with speed that came from leading Team RWBY through situations where wrong decision meant casualties. Weiss Schnee moved with aristocratic grace that concealed combat expertise earned through Schnee family training. Her rapier Mertenaster creating glyphs that defied physics, platforms of hardlight that allowed impossible movement, elemental dust integration that turned swordplay into artillery bombardment, and, most impressively, time dilation effects that made her already considerable speed look casual. Blake Belladonna approached through shadows with faunus grace, her weapon Gamble's Shroud switching between katana, kusarigama, and pistol configurations as tactical necessity demanded. Her semblance, Shadow, left duplicates that could absorb attacks or create tactical confusion, making her effectively fight as squad rather than individual. And the 4 Huntresses coordinated with precision that spoke to years fighting together. Ruby's speed creating openings, Yang's power exploiting them, Weiss's versatility providing support, and Blake's stealth enabling flanking that conventional tactics couldn't account for. For exactly 17 seconds, they had Cinder on defensive. Then Salem intervened. The ancient being descended from her Grimm command platform with movements that suggested she was bending gravity through will alone rather than semblance or dust. Salem, humanity's enemy for millennia, architect of disasters that shaped history, and immortal monster whose plans transcended normal human comprehension, studied the battlefield with expression mixing calculation and something approaching disappointment. "These children continue to interfere," Salem said, her voice carrying across combat chaos without raising volume, ancient power making her words bypass noise through metaphysical authority that demanded attention. Ruby felt ice crystallize in her veins, not from temperature but from primal recognition that she was facing threat her silver eyes couldn't counter, enemy her speed couldn't outrun, danger that transcended everything Beacon had prepared her for. "Scatter," Ruby commanded, recognizing that concentration made them vulnerable to area attacks. But Salem wasn't attacking. She was casting. Magic older than the kingdoms gathered around her pale fingers with visible distortion that made space itself appear to bend. Energy patterns that looked wrong to eyes that had only known dust and semblance. Power that predated both and operated on principles that modern remnant had forgotten. A banishment ritual. Weiss breathed with horror that came from Schnee family archives mentioning such spells in historical texts that predated the Great War. She's attempting to erase us from reality itself. That's forbidden magic. It shouldn't be possible. Yeah, well, she's making it look real easy, Yang replied, her usual confidence cracking under recognition that overwhelming force wouldn't help against metaphysical erasure. The spell manifested as vortex of dark energy that made the sky tear like fabric, revealing something underneath that human minds struggled to process. Not void exactly, but absence of reality. Dimensional space between universes where existence became negotiable concept. "Begone from this world," Salem commanded with absolute authority, her magic obeying with enthusiasm that suggested it had been waiting for opportunity to demonstrate its capabilities. The pull hit Team RWBY with force that transcended physics. Not gravity pulling them toward the vortex, but reality itself rejecting their presence. Space folding to remove them from continuity. Existence attempting to expel them like immune system attacking infection. Ruby's silver eyes widened as her feet left the ground, crescent rows providing no anchor against metaphysical displacement. "Guys!" Yang grabbed Ruby's arm with grip that would have broken normal bones, her semblance flaring as she attempted to use stored energy to resist the pull. "Hang on!" Weiss created glyph after glyph beneath their feet, trying to establish stable platform against dimensional current, her dust reserves depleting at catastrophic rate as she channeled power sufficient to anchor small building. It wasn't enough. The vortex dragged Team RWBY toward its center with inexorable momentum, reality warping around them with violence that made their auras flare and fail. Protective fields designed to absorb conventional damage completely inadequate against metaphysical assault. But Salem's spell had a flaw. Cinderfall stood too close to the epicenter, her confidence in Salem's control making her complacent, flames still dancing around her fingers as she watched Team RWBY being erased with satisfaction that suggested she was already planning victory speech. The vortex destabilized. Not completely. Salem's control was too sophisticated for catastrophic failure, but the dimensional corridor that was supposed to erase Team RWBY cleanly instead fractured along quantum boundaries, its targeting parameters expanding to include anyone within specific radius, regardless of allegiance. Cinder's eyes widened with recognition that came exactly 0.3 seconds too late to matter. "No!" The collapsing vortex grabbed her along with Team RWBY, on dimensional displacement protocols treating Fall Maiden and Huntresses with equal indifference, both groups vanishing into the rift with violence that made the battlefield's air compress then explode outward. The vortex snapped shut with sound like reality screaming. Silence fell across the battlefield with weight that came from thousands of combatants processing what they'd just witnessed. Salem's most effective opponents and her primary lieutenant, both erased through magic that shouldn't exist, banished to somewhere that sensors couldn't detect, removed from remnant through power that made dust and semblance look primitive. Salem slowly lowered her hand, her expression shifting through calculations that mortal minds couldn't follow, and processing implications of Cinder's inclusion in the banishment with analytical detachment that suggested she was already adapting plans. "Interesting," she said quietly, making the words sound like tactical assessment and death sentence simultaneously. The Grimm resumed their assault, and somewhere beyond dimensional barriers, 5 combatants from Remnant were about to discover that universes without dust, without aura, without semblance, were far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Because on Remnant, you fought monsters. But in some universes, the monsters were human. Rook Islands, North Shore, simultaneous arrival. The dimensional transit felt like dying without achieving death's release. Awareness fragmenting across infinite possible realities. Consciousness stretching until identity became negotiable concept. And most disturbing, sensation of being observed by something vast that existed in the spaces between universes. Then, impact. Ruby hit white sand with force that would have broken ribs if her aura had been active. The protective field having been completely depleted during transit, leaving her vulnerable in ways she hadn't experienced since childhood. She groaned, pushing herself upright with movements that felt wrong. Gravity slightly different, air composition unusual, temperature and humidity suggesting climate Remnant's varied regions couldn't quite replicate. "Ow," Ruby said aloud, her voice sounding strange without aura's subtle enhancement. Palm trees swayed overhead with tropical languor. Ocean waves crashed against pristine beach with rhythm that would have been peaceful under different circumstances, and stretching inland. Jungle so dense that visibility ended at 20 meters. This was definitely not Remnant. "Okay." Yang's voice came from Ruby's left, her sister sitting up with expression mixing confusion and tactical alertness. "Either we died, and this is really nice afterlife, or this is the weirdest beach I've ever woken up on. And I've woken up on some weird beaches." "Yang," Weiss said with exasperation that suggested some reactions transcended dimensional displacement, brushing sand off her combat dress with movements that maintained aristocratic dignity despite circumstances. "This is clearly not Remnant. The atmospheric composition is different. The gravitational constant feels lighter, and—" She paused, then her expression shifting to genuine concern. "I don't feel any dust in the air. Not ambient, not concentrated, nothing. It's like dust doesn't exist here," Blake finished, her faunus ears tracking sounds from the jungle with wariness that came from recognizing unfamiliar environment. Her bow, which usually concealed her cat ears in public, had been lost during transit, leaving her heritage visible. "And I'm not sensing any Grimm. No negative emotion. No malevolent presence. The jungle feels—" She searched for appropriate descriptor. "Natural. Just dangerous in normal predator-prey ways rather than metaphysically evil." Ruby stood on unsteady legs, crescent rose still gripped in her hand despite everything, the weapon's familiar weight providing psychological anchor against disorientation. She activated her scroll, the communication and data device that every huntress carried, and found exactly what she'd feared. No signal, no network connection, or database access limited to locally stored information. "We're completely cut off," Ruby said, processing implications with tactical mind that had guided Team RWBY through situations where isolation meant death. "No communication with Remnant. No idea where we are. No support. We're stranded," a voice said from behind them with weary pragmatism that suggested the speaker understood isolation intimately. Team RWBY turned with synchronized precision that spoke to combat training, eye weapons raising toward potential threat before conscious thought registered the movement. A young man stood at the jungle's edge, maybe early 20s, holding pistol with grip that suggested familiarity born from necessity rather than training. He was bruised, sunburned, wearing clothes that had been expensive once, but now showed signs of extended wilderness survival. Most concerning, he looked exhausted in ways that transcended physical fatigue, and carrying psychological weight that Ruby recognized from huntsmen who'd seen too much combat too quickly. "You're on the Rook Islands," the man said, his pistol lowering fractionally when none of the four armed girls immediately attacked. He stared at their weapons with expression mixing confusion and tactical assessment. "And I've got to ask, what the hell are you supposed to be? Because those—" He gestured at Crescent Rose, Ember Celica, Merton Aster, and Gamble's Shroud. Those aren't standard military hardware. They're not even standard experimental military hardware. They're—" "They're Huntress weapons," Ruby replied, making decision that honesty served better than evasion when stranded in unknown location. "Customized, personally maintained, and really effective against Grimm, which..." She processed his confusion. "You don't know what Grimm are? Which means we're really far from home." Yang lowered Ember Celica with movements that communicated non-aggression while maintaining combat readiness, her tactical instincts recognizing that this man represented potential intelligence source. "Look, we're friendly. Confused, lost, but friendly. How about you put the gun down and we talk like civilized people?" The man studied them with assessment that suggested he'd learned to evaluate threats quickly, his eyes tracking their body language, eye weapon positions, and most tellingly, the fact that 4 heavily armed young women had materialized on isolated beach without boat or aircraft. He slowly lowered the pistol, thumb engaging the safety with practiced motion. "Jason Brody. And before you ask, no, I'm not with the pirates. I'm..." He paused, searching for explanation that wouldn't sound insane. "I'm trying to survive long enough to rescue my friends. They were kidnapped and being held somewhere on these islands by criminal organizations that make normal gangs look civilized." "Pirates," Blake repeated, her faunus ears tracking sounds from the jungle that suggested they weren't alone on this beach. "You're saying this location is controlled by pirates, as in maritime criminals. That's..." She processed historical knowledge. "That's not supposed to be a major threat in modern era. Most nations have coast guards, naval forces. Oh, treaties that make piracy economically unviable." "Yeah, well, those treaties don't mean much here," Jason replied with dark humor that suggested he'd learned this lesson personally. "Rook Islands are outside normal jurisdiction. Multiple criminal factions, drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapon smuggling, and the local population, Rock Yacht Tribe. They're caught in middle. It's..." He looked at their weapons again. "It's hell. Tropical paradise that's actually nightmare. And you girls just washed up in middle of it carrying gear that suggests you're either military special forces or really elaborate cosplayers. Which is it?" Ruby extended her hand with a gesture that transcended cultural boundaries, her silver eyes meeting Jason's with honesty that had convinced skeptics before. "My name's Ruby Rose. This is my team, Yang, Weiss, and Blake. We're Huntresses, trained to protect people from monsters. We're from..." She paused, recognizing that "different dimension" sounded insane. "Somewhere else. We got sent here through magic we don't fully understand, and we're kinda lost. But Jason..." Her expression shifted to determination that had defined her since childhood. "Team RWBY helps people. That's what we do. So if your friends are in danger, if there are criminals holding them, we'll help. We'll figure out how to get home later. Right now, you need assistance. We provide that." Jason stared at the offered hand with expression suggesting he was processing whether this was genuine offer or elaborate trap. His paranoia clearly earned through experience that taught him to question good fortune. Then he slowly shook Ruby's hand, his grip carrying exhaustion and desperate hope in equal measure. "Thanks. His voice cracked fractionally. "I appreciate that, more than you know. But you should understand what you're volunteering for. The pirates on these islands, they're not normal criminals. They're led by a man named Vas Montenegro. He's..." Jason searched for description. "He's insane, genuinely insane, psychotic, sadistic, and he controls an army of men who are almost as crazy. Fighting them isn't going to be like whatever you're used to. This is going to be brutal." "We've fought worse," Yang said with confidence that came from battling Grimm and terrorists across Remnant. But Ruby noticed Jason's expression suggested he didn't believe that assessment. And somewhere deep in her tactical mind, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right to be skeptical. Because fighting monsters was one thing. Fighting humans who acted like monsters was something else entirely. Amanaki Village. Rakyat territory. 6 hours after arrival. The trek through the jungle had been educational in ways that Beacon Academy's survival training had never covered. Not because Remnant's wilderness was less dangerous, but because this jungle operated on principles that felt fundamentally wrong to Huntresses accustomed to Grimm-infested forests. There were no creatures of darkness attracted to negative emotion, No malevolent presence corrupting the ecosystem. Just normal predators following normal evolutionary imperatives. Hunt, feed, reproduce, survive. The danger was biological rather than metaphysical, which somehow made it feel more intimate and less forgivable. Ruby had nearly been bitten by a snake that her silver eyes couldn't detect as threat, because it wasn't evil, just hungry and territorial. Young had punched a wild boar that charged their group, her semblance flaring instinctively before she'd remembered that aura might not regenerate here. Weiss had stepped in quicksand that her glyphs barely rescued her from, and Blake's fauna's senses were overwhelmed by sheer biodiversity that Remnant's Grimm-pressured ecosystems never achieved. "This place is trying to kill us," Weiss observed while extracting leeches from her legs with aristocratic disdain that made the indignity somehow worse. "And it's not even doing it with malicious intent. It's just nature, unfiltered, without dust or Grimm shaping the evolutionary pressure. Everything here evolved to survive against everything else. That's..." She paused. "That's actually terrifying in a completely different way than Grimm." "At least you can negotiate with nature," Blake replied, her faunus ears tracking sounds that suggested they were approaching human habitation. "Grimm just want to kill you. Animals want to eat or avoid you. There's logic to it. Predictable patterns. That's almost refreshing." "Speak for yourself," Yang said, checking her gauntlets with concern that came from recognizing her ammunition was finite without dust to replenish. "I'm starting to miss Grimm. At least I knew how to fight those." Jason led them through camouflaged path that suggested long familiarity with jungle navigation, his movements carrying wariness that never fully relaxed despite being in what he'd called safe territory. When they finally emerged from the dense foliage, Ruby understood why his paranoia persisted. Amanaki village was beautiful in a way that concealed its desperation. Traditional structures built with materials harvested from jungle, populated by Rakyat people whose expressions mixed indigenous pride with refugee wariness. And most telling, defensive fortifications that suggested this wasn't peaceful settlement, but armed camp pretending to be village. Villagers stopped their activities to stare at the four young women following Jason, their weapons drawing attention that ranged from curious to alarmed to calculating. A man approached with cautious authority, late 20s, dreadlocks, carrying himself with confidence that suggested local leadership despite lacking formal military bearing. He studied Team RWBY with assessment that mixed tactical evaluation and genuine confusion. "Jason," the man said with accent that Ruby's linguistic training couldn't quite place. English, but inflected with patterns suggesting cultural background she didn't recognize. "Who are they? Because they look armed, heavily armed, and we've had enough surprises lately without you bringing random soldiers into the village." "Dennis, they're..." Jason paused, clearly struggling with explanation that wouldn't sound insane. "They're stranded. Appeared on the North Beach. No boat, no plane. Just appeared. With weapons I've never seen and abilities that don't make sense. But they offered to help rescue my friends. And Dennis..." His voice dropped. "I'm not turning down help. Not when Keith, Riley, and Oliver are still out there." Dennis Rogers. Ruby caught the name from context, studied them with renewed interest that suggested desperation was overriding caution. "You know how to fight? Actually fight. Not just posturing with expensive gear?" "We're Huntresses," Ruby replied, making the title sound like profession rather than fantasy. Her silver eyes meeting Dennis's with conviction that had persuaded skeptics before. "Trained from childhood to combat threats that would kill normal soldiers. We've fought..." She paused, recognizing that Grimm meant nothing here. "We've fought things you wouldn't believe. Monsters, terrorists, situations where retreat meant civilian casualties. We know combat, we know tactics, and we know how to work with local forces rather than taking over. Jason says your islands have pirate problem. Ooh, we can help with that." "Pirate problem," Dennis repeated with dark humor that suggested the phrase was understatement. "That's one way to describe it. Vas Montenegro controls the northern islands with army of psychopaths. Hoyt Volker runs the southern drug and slave trade with private military that would make most national armies nervous. And caught between them, the rock yacht. My people. We've been fighting for generations to maintain our territory. But, his expression hardened. We're losing, slowly, inevitably. Because bullets and machetes only go so far against opponents who have numbers, weapons, and absolutely no moral constraints. Then we change the equation, Yang said with confidence that came from her semblance literally converting adversity into strength, cracking her knuckles in gesture that suggested she was eager to apply force to deserving targets. Give us intel on where Jason's friends are being held. We'll conduct extraction, demonstrate capabilities. Then we talk about larger operational cooperation. Just like that? Dennis asked with skepticism that suggested he'd heard promises before. 4 girls, Huntresses, are going to conduct combat rescue against fortified pirate position. He studied their weapons again, his expression shifting as tactical mind processed what he was seeing. That's either suicidal confidence, or you actually possess capabilities that justify it. Which is it? Both, Blake said with faunous honesty that cut through posturing, her cat ears tracking conversations happening throughout the village with wariness that came from recognizing they were being evaluated as much as evaluated. We're good, very good, but we're also in an unfamiliar environment without support infrastructure we're accustomed to. We'll adapt, we always do, but pretending we're invincible would be foolish. We're offering skilled assistance, not miracle solutions. Dennis absorbed this with expressions suggesting he appreciated honesty over bravado, his tactical assessment apparently reaching conclusion that potential benefits outweighed risks. Right. There's abandoned cargo ship, the Medusa, stranded on the eastern coast. Pirates use it as communication hub. If Jason's friends are still alive, if they're being moved for sale. The phrase carried revulsion. The coordination would route through that location. You want to help? Start there, gather intelligence, and try not to get killed. Because explanatory report to tribal elders about how I let foreign soldiers conduct operations from our village is conversation I'd prefer to avoid if you all die immediately. We won't die, Ruby said with certainty that came from surviving Beacon's fall, Salem's forces, and countless situations where mathematics said they should have failed. We're really hard to kill. That's kind of our specialty. What she didn't say, what she was only beginning to recognize, was that surviving and remaining unchanged were different things. And the Rook Islands specialized in changing people. The Medusa, eastern coast, 18 hours later. The cargo ship looked like corpse rotting in tropical heat. Rusted hull listing at 15-degree angle, superstructure overgrown with vegetation that suggested years of abandonment. And most concerning, fresh footprints and recent trash indicating current occupation, despite the wreck's apparent dereliction. Jason crouched beside Ruby in the jungle overlooking the ship's approach, his voice dropping to whisper that combat experience had taught him carried better than normal speech. They're using it as radio relay. Pirates maintain communication network across the islands. Vaas doesn't trust cell towers, too easy for authorities to track. So they use jury-rigged systems like this, low-tech, hard to monitor, and he pulled out binoculars that looked military surplus. If they're coordinating prisoner transport, the chatter goes through locations like this. Ruby accepted the binoculars with thanks, her silver eyes processing the ship's layout with tactical assessment that Beacon's training had refined. 3 visible guards on deck, probably more inside, and defensive positions adequate against conventional assault, but vulnerable to unconventional approach, and most importantly, radio antenna suggesting active transmission capability. What are we listening for? Ruby asked, her mind already processing infiltration routes that her semblance, speed, could exploit. My friends, Jason replied, his voice carrying weight that suggested he'd been searching for months without success. Keith, Oliver, Riley, they were... He paused. They were with me when Voss's pirates ambushed us. Captured, separated. I escaped. They didn't. And every day I don't find them is another day they're... His voice cracked. "They're in hell. Being sold, tortured, used as leverage. I need to know where they are, before it's too late." Yang positioned herself on Ruby's right, her gauntlets ready but not deployed, recognizing that stealth required restraint despite her semblance rewarding aggression. "Then we get you that intel. Ruby, what's the approach?" Ruby processed variables with tactical speed that had guided Team RWBY through impossible situations. Direct assault risked alerting other pirate positions. Stealth infiltration required capabilities they possessed, but with aura potentially unreliable. And most concerning, they still didn't know if killing human opponents would affect them the way killing Grimm never had. Blake takes point, Ruby decided. Recognizing her partner's shadow semblance provided infiltration advantages, even without aura. Weiss provides glyph support if stealth fails. Yang and I cover extraction routes. Jason, she looked at him directly. You stay here. Overwatch. If this goes wrong, you're our communication backup. Like hell, Jason objected with vehemence that suggested he'd made similar arguments before. Those are my friends we're trying to save. I'm not sitting out while you risk yourselves for intelligence I need. You're not sitting out, Ruby corrected with leadership authority that had commanded huntsman teams despite her youth. You're providing crucial support. And Jason, her voice softened, you're emotionally invested. That's natural, that's human, but it makes you tactical liability during stealth operations. Trust me, we'll get your intel. Then we'll plan rescue based on what we learn. Agreed? Jason wanted to argue. Ruby could see it in his expression. But tactical discipline apparently overrode emotional need. Fine, but if you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm coming in. Friends don't leave friends behind, that's... His voice carried conviction. That's rule I'm not breaking again. Blake moved with faunus grace that made her approach look like shadow given purpose. Her cat ears tracking guard rotations with precision that came from understanding predator behavior. The ship's deck creaked under her weight despite her attempts at silence. Rust and decay, making stealth acoustically challenging. But the guard's conversation covered the noise. Ruby activated her scroll's recording function, the device's advanced technology at least functioning for local storage despite lack of network connection. If they could capture the radio chatter, translate it later, they'd have intelligence that might locate Jason's friends without extended combat. And the radio inside the ship's bridge crackled with transmission that made Blake freeze mid-step. A voice, accented, casual, carrying authority, echoed through the speakers. The Americans are valuable cargo. Hoyt's buyers want intact merchandise for the markets. Another voice, younger, eager. How much are they worth? Laughter. Enough that Voss says we keep them alive. Barely. Ship them south next week. Let Hoyt's people handle the auction. We just maintain inventory until then. Ruby's silver eyes widened with horror that transcended tactical concern. They were discussing Jason's friends like property, reducing human beings to commercial assets, talking about slavery with casual indifference that made Grimm look honest by comparison. Blake, Ruby transmitted through their team communication system, hoping the advanced remnant technology still functioned at close range. Recording this. Get visual confirmation if possible. But priority is intelligence over engagement. We need to know where they're holding the prisoners. Blake's acknowledgement came through subvocal confirmation as she positioned herself near the bridge's broken window, her faunus vision processing interior layout. 3 pirates inside, 1 operating radio equipment, maps on the wall marking locations across the islands, and, most significantly, prisoner manifest listing names that included Keith Brody, Oliver Carswell, and Riley Brody. Jason's friends, confirmed alive, scheduled for transport in 6 days. Mission accomplished. Then the door opened and a pirate emerged directly into Blake's position. For exactly 0.3 seconds, they stared at each other. Pirate processing cat-eared girl in combat gear who shouldn't exist. Blake calculating whether stealth was salvageable or if escalation was inevitable. The pirate opened his mouth to shout. Blake's hand moved with faunus reflexes, Gamble's shroud's ribbon wrapping around his throat. cutting off sound before alarm could trigger. She pulled him into shadow, her tactical training from Beacon engaging automatically despite moral hesitation that made her movements fractionally slower than optimal. The pirate struggled. Blake maintained pressure. His resistance weakened, then stopped. Blake lowered the unconscious body with movements that felt mechanical, her hands shaking fractionally as she processed what she'd just done. Non-lethal takedown, but against human opponent rather than Grimm, crossing threshold that Huntress training had prepared them for intellectually, but not emotionally. Contact neutralized, Blake transmitted with voice that carried no emotion, professional discipline overriding internal conflict. Continuing infiltration. But Ruby heard the strain in her partner's voice, recognized the psychological cost of fighting humans rather than monsters, and understood with sudden clarity that this mission would change them in ways Beacon never anticipated. "Copy," Ruby confirmed. "Abort if compromised. Intelligence gathering isn't worth casualties." Blake didn't respond immediately, her silence suggesting she was processing variables that transcended tactical assessment. Then, understood. Extracting now. She moved through the ship's interior with speed that suggested retreat rather than continued infiltration, her cat ears tracking the remaining pirates as they continued their radio conversation without realizing their perimeter had been breached. Ruby watched Blake emerge from the ship's hull with expression mixing relief and concern. Her partner moved correctly, executed properly, achieved objectives professionally. But something in Blake's eyes suggested the mission had cost more than physical effort. "Got it," Blake reported quietly once she'd rejoined the team in the jungle, pulling out her scroll showing recorded conversations and photographed documents. "Jason's friends are alive, being held at location marked on their maps. Looks like compound 15 kilometers south. Transport scheduled in 6 days. If we're going to extract them, we need to move before the transfer window." Jason grabbed the scroll with hands that shook, his eyes scanning the intelligence with expression mixing hope and rage. This is everything. This is actual confirmation they're alive, that I can still save them. He looked at Blake directly. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Blake replied with voice that suggested the victory felt hollow. "We confirmed location. Now comes the hard part. Actually getting them out, and against opponents who won't hesitate to kill them if they think rescue is imminent. She paused. "This is going to get messy." "Messy we can handle," Yang said with confidence that suggested she hadn't fully processed the implications. But Ruby noticed Blake's expression, saw the psychological weight her partner was carrying, thus and recognized with tactical clarity that had guided her through impossible situations. They'd just crossed line that separated fighting monsters from fighting humans. And crossing back was going to be significantly harder than crossing forward had been. "Ruby," Weiss said quietly, her voice carrying concern that transcended tactical assessment. "Are we certain about this? Conducting combat operations against human opponents in unfamiliar jurisdiction without proper oversight or rules of engagement? This isn't hunting, Grimm. This is..." She searched for appropriate classification. "This is warfare against people. That's what heroes do," Ruby interrupted with conviction that had defined her since childhood, silver eyes meeting Weiss's with determination that refused to acknowledge doubt. "People are in danger. We can help. That's enough. We'll worry about moral complexity after we've saved Jason's friends." "Agreed." Her team nodded with varying degrees of certainty. But none of them noticed the figure watching from deeper jungle. Pirate Scout reporting back to his commander about 4 impossible girls who just infiltrated the Medusa without triggering alarms. And none of them knew that their actions had just attracted attention from someone who specialized in breaking heroes. Someone who was very interested in seeing how long Ruby's smile would last. Voss's compound, northern Rook Islands. 2 days after Medusa infiltration. The report sat on the table like accusation. Handwritten notes from scouts who'd witnessed something that shouldn't exist. Descriptions of weapons that violated physics. And, most intriguing, 4 young women conducting military operation with precision that suggested professional training despite their apparent youth. Vas Montenegro read the report for the 3rd time, his dark eyes tracking details that others might dismiss, but his particular brand of insanity recognized as patterns worth investigating. He'd survived on these islands through combination of tactical cunning, psychological manipulation, and willingness to embrace violence that made normal criminals uncomfortable. But mostly, he survived by understanding people. What broke them, what motivated them, what illusions they clung to when reality became unbearable. And according to his scouts, one of these girls, the one in red with the oversized scythe, still smiled, still believed, still acted like hero in situation where heroism was suicide. That was interesting. 4 girls, Vas said aloud, his voice carrying accent that mixed Spanish inflection with something else. Madness given linguistic form, rage barely contained beneath casual tone. He looked at the pirate who delivered the report with expression that made subordinates nervous despite lacking overt threat. 4 girls with crazy weapons. They infiltrate the Medusa. They don't kill anyone, just knock them out like this is fucking video game where enemies respawn. And then... He laughed suddenly, the sound carrying genuine amusement mixed with something darker. Then they leave, like they're being polite, like this is some kind of civilized warfare with rules. The pirate shifted uncomfortably, recognizing when his commander was processing rather than simply reacting. Brody wasn't alone. We thought he was isolated, easy target. But these girls, they're trained, professional, maybe military. No, Vas replied, standing with movements that suggested caged predator given momentary freedom. He walked to the window overlooking jungle that stretched toward coast, his mind processing variables that conventional tactical thinking wouldn't consider. Military doesn't smile like that. Military doesn't do non-lethal takedowns when lethal is easier. Military understands that mercy is luxury you can't afford when outnumbered. These girls, he tapped his temple with gesture that had become signature tick. They still think they're heroes. They think this island has rules, that they can fight bad guys and save everyone and go home with clean conscience. So what do you want us to do? The pirate asked. Vas turned with smile that made his handsomest features look demonic. I want to see how long that lasts. I want to see the moment when the girl in red realizes that heroism here means nothing, that her smile is just mask hiding the monster underneath. Because everyone on this island, his voice dropped to register that carried more menace than shouting. Everyone becomes monster eventually. It's just question of how long denial lasts. He grabbed binoculars and looked toward the southern jungle where his scouts had tracked the girl's movement, in his mind already calculating approach that would break rather than simply kill. Bring me the one in red, Vas decided with tone that made orders sound like personal mission. Not now, not yet. Let her play hero first. Let her save some people. Let her think she's making difference. Then, he grinned wider. Then I show her what this island does to heroes. I want to see her face when she realizes she's been killing for nothing. That every person she saves just means more targets for me. That heroism here is just slower form of suicide. And the others? The pirate asked. Break them faster, Vas replied with casual cruelty that suggested he'd given similar orders countless times. Show them what happens when pretty weapons meet ugly reality. But the girl in red? He tapped his temple again. She's special. She still believes, and I'm going to enjoy watching that belief die. Slowly, painfully, until she understands what I understood years ago, that there's no such thing as heroes, just survivors and corpses. And she gets to choose which one she becomes. Rock Yacht Village. Planning the rescue. Simultaneous. The map spread across the table showed compound 15 kilometers south, fortified position surrounded by jungle, multiple guard towers, single-access road that could be blocked easily. And, according to Jason's intelligence, holding facility where his friends were being kept pending transport to Hoyt's slave markets. Ruby studied the layout with tactical mind that had guided Team RWBY through impossible situations. her silver eyes tracking patrol patterns, defensive positions, and most concerning, the sheer number of hostile combatants that conventional assault would require engaging. "This is suicide," Dennis said bluntly, his finger tracing the compound's perimeter defenses. 20 guards minimum, probably more inside, hardened position designed to resist attack, and if we assault directly, they'll kill the prisoners before we can extract them. That's standard protocol for hostage situations. Deny the rescue by eliminating the assets. We need... He paused, searching for solution that didn't exist. "We need miracle or significantly larger force. Or we need unconventional approach," Weiss replied. Her strategic training from Schnee family military education providing frameworks these people might not possess. Direct assault fails because defenders have advantage. But what if we eliminate that advantage? Create chaos that forces them to respond to multiple threats simultaneously? Divide their attention until coordination collapses? "You're describing special operations doctrine," Dennis observed with surprise that suggested he hadn't expected strategic sophistication from teenagers. "Distraction, misdirection, surgical strike while enemy is responding to false priorities. That's actually sound, but requires capabilities we don't have. Rock yacht fighters are brave but not trained for that kind of coordination." "But we are," Yang said with confidence that came from years conducting complex operations with Team RWBY. "Ruby's speed lets her hit targets before they can respond. My semblance converts damage into strength. The more they shoot at me, the harder I hit back. Weiss's glyphs create mobility advantages that conventional tactics can't counter. And Blake's shadow clones provide tactical confusion that makes 4 people fight like platoon." "Semblance?" Jason asked with confusion that suggested the term meant nothing here. "What's personal ability?" Blake explained, recognizing they'd need to simplify concepts that Remnant took for granted. "Unique to each person, manifestation of soul given tangible form. Ruby moves at speeds that blur. I create duplicates. Yang gets stronger when injured. Weiss manipulates gravity and elements. It's..." She paused, recognizing explanation sounded like fantasy. "It's what makes Huntresses effective against overwhelming odds." "Prove it," Dennis challenged with skepticism that suggested he'd heard impressive claims before. Ruby smiled, genuine expression that hadn't wavered despite everything they'd faced, and activated her semblance. She vanished in burst of rose petals, crossing the room's 30-foot length in time that normal human perception couldn't track, appearing behind Dennis with Crescent Rose's blade resting gently against his shoulder before he'd processed that she'd moved. "Fast enough?" Ruby asked cheerfully. Dennis spun with expression mixing shock and tactical recalculation. How did you moved faster than I could see? That's not possible. That's semblance," Ruby confirmed, returning to her position with same impossible speed. "And that's without aura active. With our protective fields functioning, we're significantly more durable. Problem is..." Her expression shifted to concern. "We don't know if aura regenerates here. Remnant has ambient energy, dust, that sustains semblance and aura. This world doesn't, which means our capabilities might be limited to what we have, rather than unlimited resource we can replenish." "So you're powerful," Dennis concluded, his tactical assessment apparently reaching new conclusion. "But not invincible. You have extraordinary abilities with potentially finite uses. He studied the map again. "That's still better than anything we currently possess. If you can infiltrate, eliminate guards without raising alarm, and secure the prisoners before defensive response mobilizes, this becomes achievable rather than suicidal. He paused. "I'm authorizing this operation. With condition, you take rock yacht fighters as support. Not lead element. You've demonstrated capabilities that justify point position, but backup if extraction fails." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Ruby confirmed, recognizing that local support could mean difference between successful extraction and catastrophic failure. What she didn't mention, what she was carefully not thinking about, was that this operation would require killing. Not Grimm, not monsters, people. And somewhere in her tactical mind, Ruby recognized that crossing that threshold would change her in ways she couldn't predict. The compound. Rescue operation. 36 hours later. Night fell across the Rook Islands with tropical abruptness, daylight giving way to darkness without the prolonged twilight that Remnant's shattered moon created. Ruby crouched in jungle overlooking the compound with her team, studying guard rotations through scope that Jason had provided. 4 on perimeter, Ruby whispered, or her tactical assessment processing movements that suggested boredom rather than alertness. 2 at the main gate, unknown number inside the central structure where prisoners are likely held. Blake, can you— Already counting, Blake confirmed, her faunus night vision providing advantages that human eyes couldn't match. I see 8 more inside, maybe more in areas my sightline doesn't cover. This is— She paused. This is going to require precision. One mistake and they execute the hostages. Then we don't make mistakes, Yang said with confidence that her semblance sustained through situations where normal confidence would break. Weiss created series of glyphs that only she could see, preparation for rapid deployment if stealth failed, positioning advantage that would let Team RWBY respond faster than conventional defenders could coordinate. On my mark, Ruby commanded, on her silver eyes tracking guard patterns with precision that came from understanding human behavior. Blake, primary guard tower. Yang, backup tower. Weiss, maintain glyph network for extraction. I'll breach the central structure and locate the prisoners. Questions? Just one. Jason's voice came through the radio with tension that suggested he understood stakes. If this goes wrong, if they start executing prisoners, what's the fallback? Ruby's expression hardened with determination that had guided her through impossible situations. It doesn't go wrong. We've trained for this. We're good at this. And Jason— Her voice softened fractionally. We're bringing your friends home. Trust us. I do, Jason confirmed. Just don't die. I've lost enough people on these islands. Noted, Ruby replied. Execute in 3, 2, 1. Our mark. Blake moved with faunus silence that made her approach invisible to human guards, her shadow semblance creating duplicate that positioned on opposite side of guard tower. Tactical confusion that made single guard think he was surrounded before Blake's ribbon wrapped around his throat, cutting off sound before consciousness. Min Young hit her target with explosive force that came from months of refined semblance control. Enough power to guarantee immediate unconsciousness without the noise that gunfire would create. Her gauntlets deployed but not discharged. Ruby entered the compound through speed that made her approach look like red streak rather than human movement, her semblance carrying her across open ground in time measured in fractions of seconds. The central structure's door was locked. Ruby's scythe cut through it. Inside, 3 guards, weapons raised in defensive positions that suggested they'd been alerted despite careful approach, and behind them, cells containing exactly 3 prisoners who matched Jason's descriptions. Keith Brody, Oliver Carswell, Riley Brody, alive, beaten, terrified, but alive. Get down, Ruby commanded the prisoners, her scythe already moving as the guards opened fire. Bullets struck where she'd been standing, a conventional firearms tracking movement that conventional humans couldn't avoid. But Ruby wasn't conventional. She moved between the shots with speed that made their weapons irrelevant, Crescent Rose's blade striking with precision that Beacon's training had refined through thousands of hours. Incapacitating strikes rather than lethal ones, because Ruby still believed heroes didn't kill when alternatives existed. The first guard went down with broken ribs. The second collapsed with shattered knee. The third's weapon discharged directly at Ruby's center mass from range too close to dodge even with semblance. Her aura flared instinctively, the protective field absorbing kinetic impact that would have killed her, her body registering damage but not injury. The guard's eyes widened as Ruby, who should have been dead, instead stood perfectly fine, her silver eyes processing what had just happened. Her aura worked. Despite no ambient dust, despite different universe, her soul's manifestation still protected her. Relief flooded through Ruby's tactical mind. Then guilt immediately followed as she realized what that meant. She could fight, could take risks, could engage with aggression that conventional human soldiers couldn't match, could become exactly the kind of overwhelming force that separated heroes from conquerors. "Ruby!" Blake's voice carried urgency through the comms. "Perimeter breach. More guards responding from secondary positions. We've got maybe 90 seconds before this becomes firefight. We can't win through stealth. Extraction now." Ruby moved to the cells with speed that made her appear to teleport. Crescent Rose's mechanisms picking locks that primitive security couldn't defend against advanced Huntress tools. "Jason sent us," Ruby said quickly to the prisoners who stared at her with expressions mixing hope and disbelief. "We're getting you out. Can you move?" Keith, oldest of the three, carrying himself with leadership despite obvious torture, nodded with determination that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "We can move. Who are you?" "Explanations later," Ruby replied, helping him to his feet while her tactical mind processed extraction routes. "Blake, we're coming out. Clear path to secondary exit?" "Negative," Blake responded with controlled alarm. "They're converging. Ruby, we're compromised. They know we're here. They're mobilizing everything. This is about to get very loud." Yang's voice cut through with excitement that suggested her semblance was already engaging. "Then let's make it loud. Weiss, glyphs for rapid extraction. Ruby, get those prisoners to the rally point. Blake and I will provide covering fire." The compound erupted, not with stealth and precision, with chaos and violence. Gunfire from dozens of weapons. Guards responding with coordination that suggested they drilled for exactly this scenario. And most concerning, RPG launcher tracking Ruby's position as she emerged from the central structure with 3 rescued prisoners. Weiss's glyph intercepted the rocket mid-flight, her gravity manipulation redirecting the projectile into jungle where it exploded harmlessly. But that defensive action had cost her, aura draining visibly, and her reserves depleting with each use of semblance that this universe's physics apparently didn't sustain. "Aura at 40%, Weiss transmitted with controlled concern. "I can maintain defense, but not indefinitely. We need to disengage before reserves deplete completely." Yang laughed, actual laughter, as bullets struck her, her semblance converting each impact into strength that made her next punch shatter concrete. "This is actually working. They shoot me. I get stronger. I hit harder." She paused. "It's almost too easy. These guys aren't Grimm. They're not even good soldiers. They're people," Blake interrupted, her voice carrying weight that suggested she was processing implications Yang was ignoring. "Yang, we're fighting people, not monsters. People. That matters. That should matter." "Right now it doesn't," Yang replied with pragmatism that suggested the island was already changing her. "Right now, they're trying to kill us, and we're trying to save prisoners. Moral complexity can wait until after we've survived." Ruby coordinated extraction with tactical precision that battlefield experience had refined, her commands guiding Team RWBY and the rescued prisoners through compound's weakest defensive positions, her semblance providing speed that turned impossible retreat into achievable objective. They made it to the jungle with all 3 prisoners and 0 friendly casualties. And behind them, the compound burned, not from deliberate arson, but from RPG that had missed its target and struck fuel storage instead. The pirates didn't pursue into the jungle, and in the aftermath silence, Ruby realized with terrible clarity, they'd just conducted successful military operation against human opponents, had injured dozens. Killed. She stopped that thought before it could complete. "Mission accomplished," Ruby transmitted to Jason, her voice carrying exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue. "We have your friends. Coming to rally point. Prepare medical support." Jason's response carried emotion that suggested he was crying. You actually did it. You saved them. Thank you. Thank you so much." Ruby should have felt satisfaction, should have felt heroic. Instead, she felt hollow, because somewhere in the chaos, she'd crossed line that separated fighting monsters from fighting humans. And crossing back was going to be significantly harder than she'd anticipated. Rakyat Village. Medical facility. 3 days after successful rescue. Jason's reunion with his friends had been emotional in ways that transcended language. Brothers embracing after months of believing each other dead. Survivors processing trauma through shared experience. And most tellingly, the moment when Keith looked at his younger brother and said quietly, "You became someone else out here, didn't you?" Jason's silence had been answer enough. Ruby watched from distance, her silver eyes tracking interactions with tactical assessment that had become instinctive. The rescued prisoners were malnourished, beaten, carrying psychological scars that would take years to heal, but alive. That should have been enough. That should have felt like victory. Instead, Ruby kept replaying the compound assault in her mind. The guard whose knee she'd shattered. The pirate Blake had choked unconscious. The dozens who'd been injured during their extraction. Not Grimm. Not monsters given form by humanity's negativity. Just people who'd made terrible choices and were now paying prices that ranged from injury to death. "You're thinking too much," Yang said, settling beside her sister with concern that transcended their usual sibling dynamic. "I can see it in your face. You're processing, analyzing, trying to categorize what we did into boxes marked heroic or necessary or whatever makes you feel better about fighting humans instead of Grimm. Aren't you?" Ruby asked quietly, her voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. "Yang, we hurt people. Badly. Some of them might not recover. We did that. Not Salem, not Cinder. Us, and—" She paused, searching for words. "And I don't know if that makes us heroes or just better-equipped criminals." Yang's expression shifted through emotions before settling on pragmatic acceptance that suggested she'd already processed these questions. Does it matter? Those prisoners would be dead or worse if we hadn't acted. Jason's brothers would be sold into slavery. The rock yacht would continue losing ground to pirates who torture for entertainment. We had capability. We had opportunity. We chose to act. The alternative was watching people suffer when we could prevent it. She paused. That's what heroes do, Ruby. Even when it's not clean. Even when it costs something. "But what does it cost?" Ruby asked, her silver eyes meeting Yang's lilac gaze with intensity that demanded honesty. "What does it cost us?" Weiss is getting colder, more tactical. She talks about acceptable casualties now. Blake barely speaks. Just watches everything with those eyes like she's waiting for the next person she has to hurt. "And you," Ruby's voice caught. "You laughed, Yang. During the firefight. You were laughing while people were shooting at us. That's not you. That's what the island is making you." Yang's expression hardened fractionally, her usual confidence wavering before reasserting itself. "Maybe. Or maybe this is who we always were, and Remnant just gave us prettier enemies to fight. Grimm are easy, Ruby. They're evil. No moral complexity. No families waiting for them. No potential for redemption. We could kill thousands and sleep fine because they weren't really alive. But people?" She gestured toward the compound they'd assaulted. "People are messy. They make bad choices. They suffer consequences. And sometimes they need to be stopped, regardless of how that makes us feel. That's reality. The island isn't changing us. It's just removing the comfortable illusions." "I don't accept that," Ruby said with conviction that had defined her since childhood, standing despite exhaustion that transcended physical fatigue. "We're not becoming like them. We're not letting this island turn us into monsters who justify violence through necessity. We can fight without losing ourselves. We can protect people without becoming what we protect them from." That's... Her voice strengthened. "That's what being Huntress means. Not just the fighting, the choosing not to let fighting consume who we are." "Noble sentiment," a new voice said from the medical facility's entrance, carrying accent that mixed amusement with something darker. "But naive. This island has rules, little girl. And rule number 1, everyone breaks eventually. Everyone becomes what they fight. That's not philosophy. That's gravity. You can resist, but eventually..." The voice paused. Eventually you fall. Ruby turned with crescent rows already half deployed, her combat reflexes engaging before conscious thought identified the speaker. A man stood in the doorway, late 20s, handsome in dangerous way, carrying himself with casual confidence that suggested he'd walked into armed camps before and walked out unharmed. His eyes tracked Ruby with interest that made her skin crawl, assessment mixing tactical evaluation with psychological dissection. Vas Montenegro had come to meet the girl in red personally. "Who are you?" Ruby demanded, her tactical mind processing variables. Unknown contact, potentially hostile, positioned between her and exit, expression suggesting this wasn't chance encounter. "Vas," he replied with slight bow that mocked formality. "I run things on the Northern Islands, pirates, drug trade, various criminal enterprises that keep this paradise profitable. And you?" He pointed at Ruby with gesture carrying more weight than simple identification. "You're the hero. The one who smiles while killing my men. The one who thinks she can save everyone. The one who still believes this island has rules that matter." Yang moved to intercept, positioning herself between Vas and Ruby with protective instinct that transcended tactical calculation. "You've got 10 seconds to leave before we demonstrate exactly how little your reputation means to us." "Or what?" Vas asked with genuine curiosity. "You'll kill me? In middle of Rakyat village? In front of witnesses? That would make you criminals rather than heroes. That would prove my point, that you're just like me, only with prettier weapons and better marketing. So no," he smiled. "You won't kill me, because killing me means admitting I'm right, that there's no difference between us except I'm honest about what I am." Before Yang could respond, Blake materialized from shadow with Gambol Shroud's blade positioned against Vas's throat, her faunus reflexes having allowed approach he hadn't detected. "Then I'll be honest too. Leave, now, or learn exactly how fast Huntresses can make threats disappear." Vas didn't flinch, didn't even tense, just studied Blake with expression mixing approval and calculation. "See, now that's interesting. You threaten. You position for kill strike. You commit to violence without hesitation. That's professional. That's someone who understands how this island works. But," his eyes shifted back to Ruby, "she's different. The girl in red still hesitates, still processes, still tries to categorize everything into boxes marked right and wrong, like the universe cares about her moral framework. That's," he tapped his temple with signature gesture, "that's what makes her fascinating. Because everyone breaks eventually, and I want to see what she becomes when she does." "Get out," Ruby said with authority that had commanded huntsman teams despite her youth, her silver eyes meeting Vas's dark gaze with conviction that refused to acknowledge fear. "You're not welcome here. This is Rakyat territory. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and if you think we won't defend this village, you fundamentally misunderstand who we are." "Do I?" Vas asked, stepping back from Blake's blade with movement suggesting he'd never felt threatened. "Because from where I stand, you're 4 lost girls playing soldier in war they don't understand. You saved 3 prisoners. Congratulations. But tomorrow, I'll capture 6 more. You assault 1 compound. I'll fortify 3 others. You kill my men." He shrugged. "I recruit replacements. This island has infinite supply of people willing to do terrible things for money. You have finite energy, finite ammunition, finite time before you realize that heroism here is just an elaborate form of suicide." He walked toward the exit, pausing at the threshold. "I'll give you 1 week. 1 week to play hero. Save some people. Feel good about yourselves. Then," his smile widened, "then I show you what happens to heroes on the Rook Islands. I show you what you'll become. And Ruby," he looked back at her directly, "I'll be watching when that smile finally breaks. Because it will. They always do." Vas departed, leaving Team RWBY to process threat that transcended immediate violence. "That was," Weiss started, her aristocratic composure cracking fractionally. "That was psychological warfare. He wasn't here to attack. He was here to plant doubt. To make us question whether our actions matter. That's effective." Blake finished with faunus pragmatism. Because he's right about one thing. We can't save everyone, can't stop everything. This island is too big, too corrupt, too entrenched in systems we don't understand. We're 4 Huntresses without support infrastructure, without dust, without certainty that our aura will keep regenerating. Every operation depletes resources we can't fully replenish. That's tactical reality we need to acknowledge. So what? Ruby asked, her voice carrying defiance that had sustained her through impossible situations. We give up? Accept that some people suffer because logistics are inconvenient? I don't accept that. We're Huntresses. We protect people. That's what we do. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Ruby, Yang started. No, Ruby interrupted with conviction that transcended her sister's concern. Voss wants us to doubt. Wants us to question. Wants us to become cynical and broken like everyone else on this island. But we're not everyone else. We're Team RWBY. We've survived Salem, survived Beacon's Fall, survived everything Remnant threw at us. We don't break, we adapt, we overcome. And we prove that heroism still matters even in places that have forgotten what heroes look like. The silence that followed carried weight, her team processing Ruby's conviction and weighing it against tactical realities they'd encountered. Then Yang smiled, genuine expression that hadn't appeared since the compound assault. Right, so we keep fighting, keep saving people. And when Voss makes his move, because we all know he's going to, we remind him that underestimating Huntresses is really bad tactical decision. Agreed. Agreed, Weiss confirmed with aristocratic certainty. Agreed, Blake added with faunus resolve. Ruby nodded, her silver eyes reflecting determination that had defined her since childhood. But none of them noticed the figure watching from jungle beyond the village. Scout reporting back to different commander, providing intelligence about 4 impossible girls to organization that operated on different scale than Voss's pirates. None of them knew that Cinderfall had been observing their operations since arrival. And none of them suspected that the real threat wasn't Voss's psychological games or pirate brutality. It was what would happen when Salem's agent finished establishing alliance with Hoyt Volker and gained access to resources that could reopen the dimensional rift. Hoyt's compound, Southern Rook Islands. Simultaneous. The facility looked more like corporate headquarters than criminal stronghold. Modern architecture, professional security, as infrastructure suggesting significant capital investment rather than improvised pirate operation. This was organized crime operating at scale that made Voss's chaotic violence look amateur by comparison. Cinderfall stood in the office overlooking carefully manicured grounds, studying displays showing financial data from operations spanning multiple continents. Hoyt Volker's empire wasn't limited to these islands. It was global network using this location as hub for trafficking, drug trade, and weapon smuggling that generated billions in annual revenue. Your assessment? Hoyt asked from his position behind the desk, his businessman demeanor concealing ruthlessness that had built empire through calculated cruelty. The dimensional fracture that brought us here is unstable but not closed, Cinder replied with Fall Maiden's authority, her flames dancing between fingers with casual display of power that conventional physics couldn't explain. With sufficient energy input and proper geometric alignment, it could be reopened, controlled, potentially expanded to allow transit of... She paused, considering how much to reveal. Additional assets from my universe. Assets, Hoyt repeated with smile that suggested he recognized euphemism. You mean armies, forces loyal to your employer. This Salem you mentioned during our initial negotiations. You want to bring invasion force through Dimensional Gateway. That's... He chuckled. That's admirably ambitious, but also potentially catastrophic for this island if the process fails. What's risk assessment? Acceptable, Cinder lied smoothly, her voice carrying conviction that came from years manipulating people more intelligent than Hoyt. The energy requirements are substantial but achievable with your infrastructure. The geometric alignment requires specific coordinates during particular astronomical configurations, approximately 2 weeks from now. And the potential complications, her flames intensified, are manageable, especially if certain obstacles are removed before the operation commences. Obstacles, Hoyt said, pulling up surveillance footage showing Team RWBY's compound assault. You mean these 4 girls who've been assisting Voss's targets? The ones with impossible weapons conducting operations that suggest military training beyond anything conventional forces possess? Those obstacles? Yes, Cinder confirmed. I'm studying Ruby's image with expression mixing recognition and calculation. They're from Remnant, my universe. Huntresses trained to fight monsters called Grimm. They possess capabilities, semblances, aura, that give them advantages conventional soldiers can't match, but her smile turned predatory. They're also naive, idealistic, convinced that heroism matters even in environments where it's liability, that idealism is exploitable. Voss understands this instinctively. He's already begun psychological operations designed to break rather than kill them. She paused. That's surprisingly sophisticated for a man who appears to be barely controlled psychotic. Voss has his uses, Hoyt replied with tone suggesting complicated relationship between business partner and barely tolerated asset. His chaos creates profitable opportunities. His violence keeps competitors cautious. And his instinct for psychological manipulation, he gestured at the surveillance footage, occasionally produces results that conventional tactics couldn't achieve. If he can neutralize these huntresses through breaking their morale rather than direct combat, that serves our interests. Broken heroes don't interfere with dimensional gateway operations. Dead heroes potentially create martyrdom that inspires others. Agreed, Cinder said, recognizing Kindred's strategic mind. So we allow Voss to conduct his psychological warfare. Meanwhile, I prepare the ritual, gather necessary components, establish geometric coordinates, and in 2 weeks, her flames created miniature vortex that mimicked the dimensional rupture. We reopen the gateway, not to return home. I have no interest in returning to Remnant while Salem's plans remain incomplete, but to bring through assets that will establish Salem's presence in this universe. Her eyes glowed with maiden power. That's opportunity beyond simple escape. That's conquest. And if the Huntresses interfere, Hoyt asked. Then they die, Cinder replied with casual certainty. They're good, possibly exceptional by this world's standards, but they're still children playing at warfare. I've killed better. I'll kill them too if necessary. She smiled. That's almost disappointing. I was hoping for more challenge. Ruby stood on the beach where they'd first arrived, and watching sunset paint the ocean in colors that would have been beautiful if they didn't represent another day trapped in universe that wasn't home. Behind her, the village prepared for night. Guards establishing perimeter, families securing homes, survivors processing trauma that would never fully heal. And somewhere in the jungle, Voss watched through binoculars with a smile that suggested he was enjoying a show only he fully appreciated. She still believes, Voss said to himself, his voice carrying satisfaction. After everything, after the killing, after the compromise, she still thinks she's hero. He lowered the binoculars. That's beautiful. In way, like watching flower grow in toxic waste. Doesn't belong, can't survive, but tries anyway. I almost admire it. He turned to his lieutenant with expression shifting to calculation. Increase pressure. Hit villages they've protected. Take prisoners they've freed. Show them that every victory is temporary. That saving people just makes them targets. I want to see how long that smile lasts when she realizes she's making things worse. And if she breaks? The lieutenant asked. Then I've won, Voss replied. Because broken heroes are most honest thing on this island. They finally admit what they are. Survivors who killed to keep surviving. No pretense, no illusion, just truth. And truth. He tapped his temple. Truth is what this island teaches everyone eventually. Lightning flashed across the ocean, illuminating storm clouds gathering on horizon. And deep in the jungle, Team RWBY was beginning to change in ways they didn't fully recognize. Ruby's smile was still there, but it was starting to crack. Team RWBY entered the Rook Islands through Salem's banishment spell. They found tropical hell masquerading as paradise. They met Jason Brody, rescued his friends, and proved that Huntresses could adapt to warfare against humans rather than Grimm. But the island was changing them. Ruby struggled with human casualties. Young adapted too quickly to violence. Blake grew silent and withdrawn. Weiss became colder and more tactical. Voss Montenegro recognized Ruby's heroism as vulnerability to exploit. Hoyt Volker allied with Cinderfall to reopen the dimensional gateway. And somewhere between saving people and surviving chaos, our Team RWBY discovered that fighting monsters was easier than fighting the monster the island wanted them to become. The rift could be reopened in 2 weeks. Salem's forces could invade. But first, Ruby had to survive Voss's psychological warfare. First, Team RWBY had to prove that heroism mattered even in places that had forgotten heroes existed. First, they had to answer the question Voss kept asking. How long could Ruby's smile last when the island demanded she become something else? Some battles are won through strength, others through conviction. And the hardest battles are fought against what you might become if you stop believing that better world is possible. Ruby Rose believed, despite everything, against all evidence. The island was about to test exactly how much that belief could cost, and whether paying that price would leave anything of the hero she'd been.